Hello, everybody. So don't worry, we'll actually do it this time. I just wanted to make sure I had a couple people around who would be engaged before we get into doing this. So I think this is going to be fun. This is something I've been wanting to do long before this became a meme. Actually, this is a big meme. Actually, one of my favorite instances of this whole what's it called again? Tier list meme is that the whole tier list meme. Sorry, is was Eckhart's Ladder did a really good one about Star Wars capital ship tiers. Maybe I'll do like a waifu one at some point. I'm gonna do a political ideology one at some point. So, yeah, this is something I've been wanting to do for a really long time, and I just never really got around to it. In part, just because we didn't really have stuff from the show. I was waiting for kind of the show to finish. So what we're going to do is we're going to rate the monarchs, the potential monarchs for the Iron Throne on a scale of S to D. And there's going to be multiples of different monarchs. Like I think I have 2 or 3 Tommens and 2 or 3 Joffreys, depending on who would actually become the regent or something like that sort of thing. Okay, so let's start off with maybe an easy one. So I'm gonna just start listing them, and people can say what they think. Okay, so firstly we have Jaehaerys. Sorry, these are the scale. So we have Jaehaerys the First, by far the greatest king Westeros has ever had. Then Aegon the Conqueror, then Aegon the Unlikely, Aenys the First, and Aegon the Unworthy, the worst king Westeros has ever had. Okay, so let's start out with Viserys. What would Viserys have been like if he had become king of Westeros? It's an interesting question. Viserys is an interesting case as to whether or not madness is it's like a nature versus nurture thing with regards to Viserys. Would he have turned out that bad if things had been different? My headcanon as to why he turned out so crazy is because we know he had to go across Essos begging for money, going from court to court to evade assassins. My view is that the various magisters and stuff demanded sexual favors from him in order to give in exchange for money because they liked the idea of humiliating a Targaryen, of humiliating a Dragon Lord. So Adam K says should have Roose on here. He was a good Northern leader. Maybe I'll add him later. I can add people. That's not really an issue. It's just the issue with Roose is he's not a candidate for the Iron Throne. I can't think of a scenario under which he could become king. So, I mean, this is all theoretical. Viserys obviously would be an unmitigated disaster as a ruler. Probably one of the worst people on this list. He has absolutely no redeeming characteristics. He has no idea what he's doing. He's not particularly well educated, smart, or brave. And he's just kind of really, really stupid. So he gets a D from me. Okay, let's see. Who else should we do? Let's do Renly next. So we have Renly Baratheon, Robert's younger brother. Oh, well, his youngest brother, because Stannis is also his youngest brother, even though Stannis acts like the older brother in the relationship, which is kind of weird. Actually, I'm going to add Robert to this list just while we're talking. I'm not sure. Renly, I always felt people were unfair to him, because at the end of the day... Oh, somebody sent me money, I think. Is that money? Oh, no, someone's following me on Twitch. That's what that is. Let's see here. Let me just add Robert. Like at the end of the day, unlike a lot of the other candidates, Renly has experience ruling. He's ruled the Stormlands as a de facto king for a very long time now, for like, what is it, like 18 years. He has experience being on the small council. He has experience like running the country. He's well liked. People like Renly. He also is very politically astute. He did a very good job in getting the Tyrells on his side. So I guess the only real downside to Renly as a leader, other than his inability to sire an heir, because I don't think he would have been able to sire an heir, is he might not have been willing enough to make the difficult decisions. He might have been a bit like Aenys, where he would just do what people wanted him to do, and he wouldn't really be capable enough to kind of do what needed to be done. That being said, his willingness to overthrow Joffrey in a coup, I think, kind of goes against that. So I'm going to give Renly. What do you guys think I should give Renly? Before I vote on it, I'll just go ahead and vote in the chat. People are saying, okay, so we have a B. Yeah, I'm going to go with B for Renly. I don't know if he'd be an X. B is like okay or fairly good. I will see. I wasn't sure to put him a B or to do A. So, okay, so who do we have next on the list? Okay, so Renly is like a B or a B plus. Okay, so we have Gendry. Gendry's on here kind of for meme and just for completionism's sake. Gendry would... It's an interesting question. The biggest issue with him is that he has absolutely no experience, no education, or anything required to be a king. On the other hand, he's not a psycho. And D on this list is kind of reserved for people who would be total psychos. I think Gendry, he is an honorable and decent man. He probably would take someone like Davos or Tyrion and let them run the country, and they would know what they were doing. Still, though, he is not in any way fit to be king, so I will put him at C tier. Okay, so let's maybe do something a little more interesting. Okay, so we have Joffrey and Tywin. Joffrey ruling as king with Tywin Lannister about as hand. So under this scenario, which is what might have happened in the show if the Purple Wedding wouldn't have happened, Joffrey would basically be controlled by Tywin until he came of age, and probably after that. Tywin showed that basically he was willing to imprison Joffrey to prevent him from making an ass out of himself in public, and that sort of thing. So I think under that scenario, things would probably go pretty well. I mean, Tywin is not a good person. Tywin is a massive, massive asshole. But on the other hand, Tywin is a very, very competent administrator. During the time Aerys was in office, actually it's funny because Aerys, despite being crazy, might actually be up in A, because his reign was like a massive part of was peace and prosperity because he just let Tywin run everything. Tywin has never really shown any indication of being corrupt. Tywin has never really shown any like that kind of thing. The issue with this scenario is Tywin's old, he wouldn't be able to run things forever, and Joffrey is a lunatic. So I could see Joffrey like getting the Kingsguard to kill him or shooting him with a crossbow or something else crazy like that. So I don't think under any circumstances this would work out. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with a C. Because it's not as bad as Joffrey ruling alone, but it's not good. So then we have Tywin and Tommen. Now this has a lot more benefits and a lot fewer drawbacks than what we had with Joffrey Tywin. Tommen, I think, is someone's people are very unfair to, particularly because in the books he's like 7 or 8, and in the show they aged him up, so they kind of have a character where um, it's the personality and actions are of someone younger, but they put it in someone older. Even then, I think in the show he's only like 14 or something. He's very young. He was neglected by his mother, and he wasn't really given much of a chance. You know what? I forgot Myrcella. I have to add Myrcella in. Oops. Let me just add Myrcella in. She should be on this list. Okay, let me just... Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a professional. I'm a professional tier lister / Game of Thrones commentator. Okay, so you have that. Tommen was also very willing to learn. Like when Tywin tried to explain things to him, he immediately understood what the point he was trying to get across is. He understood that to be a good king, you have to have the people around you who you can trust and who are like smart enough and will act for the good of the realm. So I think everything probably would have worked out pretty good. Of the things that realistically could have happened in the series prior to the end of the books, and in the show even, I'd say this is the best possible outcome. So I'm going to give this an S, actually. I think under the combination of them, it would have been pretty good. Now, Adam is debating and saying that Tommen would be too weak. I don't know. Maybe I'll lower this to an A. I think things would have worked out much, much better, though. Tommen was very young. Okay, so let's see. Who else do we have? Joffrey ruling by himself. Now, I think like we don't even really need to talk about this one because it's so obviously a disaster. I mean, Joffrey is insane. Like, he's completely insane. And he's also extremely incompetent and inept. I mean, it's bad enough that he's crazy, but he's also very cowardly and very weak. So I think nobody's surprised. I'm going to give Joffrey a D. He might actually be as bad as Aegon the Unworthy. I regard Aegon the Unworthy as being the worst king. I think George R.R. Martin has said that he's the worst king too. So let's see here. Sorry, there's just a couple other people I forgot to put in. Don't worry, I'm a professional. Okay, there we go, to add the other people in. Okay, so we have those so far. What about Joffrey and Marjorie ruling together? Okay. Okay, next person. Okay, so this is going to get a whole bunch of people well, before I say that. Okay. So Stannis the Manus, or as I like to call him, Stannis Mind by Rights Baratheon. A fan favorite. People love Stannis in both the books and the show. And a lot of people think he would be the best king because he's someone who doesn't compromise. He's 100% honest, 100% honorable. He always does what's generally seen as the right thing. People like Stannis. Now, this is an issue that's going to come up probably a couple times on this list. The Iron Throne seems to work like most monarchies do, in the sense that there is a necessity of a religious requirement to inherit the throne. Most monarchical houses have a religion requirement. Like the various French dynasties require the ruler to be Catholic. Until very recently, the United Kingdom required a Protestant ruler. In Japan, it requires a Shinto ruler. And Stannis is not Faith of the Seven. So whether or not he can even really legally inherit the throne, given that, is an interesting question. I'm not sure if the High Septon has to crown the king or not, but he couldn't in this case. So there's that issue. There's also the issue of him being a member of some weird foreign religion that's no one's ever heard of in a kingdom that's 90% faith of the seven. Um, I think what you could have had, and the closest, I guess, kind of example to this is when Magor took power and just basically went back to being Valerian religiously and just started marrying multiple women, killing people, just becoming a total tyrant. So I could see another faith militant uprising happening. Also, Stannis would have zero popular support. Nobody really likes him outside of like a couple people in the Stormlands. So I think he would just basically alienate everybody. Um, I think he would just wind up alienating everybody, and he would almost immediately there would be a civil war. I can't see basically anyone other than maybe, well, no, but the North is independent. I can't really see anyone accepting him or allowing him to continue on. I think, honestly, I think a Stannis reign would be a disaster. And I don't think he would last more than a couple of years. I think Stannis, if this was like Hand, I'd probably give him like an A. I think he'd be a very good Hand. I think as a monarch, though, his reign would be an unmitigated disaster. And I'm going to stick with that. So Stannis, very controversially, gets a C. I'm sure people are going to be bad mouthing me in the comments for that. Please no bully. It's just I'm just giving my opinion. That's what I think. I think Stannis is a good man, but I don't think his time in office would be very successful. Okay, so who else do we have on this list? Okay, so we have Jon Snow. Now, how would Jon Snow have been if he had of? We're gonna assume because Jon's pretty similar, at least in my. He's a bit smarter in the books. Um, how can I have Renly above him? Because Renly wouldn't have immediately started a Renly wouldn't have immediately started a civil war. Renly is at least nominally faith of the seven, and he has the backing of the Tyrells, and people just like him in general, whereas nobody likes Stannis. Let's see here. Yeah, so Jon Snow. So Jon Snow is a bit smarter in the books, but a lot of people really wanted him to win, probably because he's always kind of been a fan favorite, and heading into the last season, there wasn't really that many candidates left. So people were kind of cheering for him, but would Jon have been a good king? I'm going to say no, because once again, there's the religion requirement. Jon is not faith of the seven in a kingdom that's 5% faith of the seven, which is a problem. Number two, he has absolutely no knowledge, basically, of Southern culture, of Southern politics, of anything outside of the North, which is fine if you're the king in the North. I'm sure if this was king in the North, he'd get like an A or S. I'm sure he'd be really good at that. As a ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, I don't think it would work very well. I'm not sure if Jon really has the strength of character to make difficult decisions. Part of the issue is in the show his writing's just very poor, and his character arc gets aborted after the Battle of the Bastards, and he just becomes a pussy. So I think Jon would be a uncorrupt ruler, but he would probably surround himself with people who were too nice to really get anything done. And for that reason, I give him a C on the list. I'm sure people are going to get angry, but part of the reason of doing these is to be controversial. Okay, so who else do we have here? Let's do the guy who won in the show, Okay, Bran the Broken, Bran Stark. So the question is, what are we gonna? Also keep in mind, just because I'm giving people a low rating, that's not a reflection of how they are as a person. It's just kind of me trying to look at the whole, what I think would happen geopolitically. Obviously, Stannis is probably a better person than Renly, but yeah. Okay, so Bran Stark. How would he do as king? Well, firstly, once again, we have the religion issue. And more than that, he's basically a sorcerer in the medieval era. So I don't know how well people would take like having a king who has weird magical powers. I don't know, like some people might think it's okay. I think a lot of people would be really creeped out by it. And people would just be creeped out by him because Bran's a really weird guy. Um, he's like creepy and awkward, and it's strongly implied in the show that he knew there was going to be a genocide and he didn't like care. He's like, "Oh, I came down here because I knew you were going to make me king." And I'm like, "But so you knew Danny was going to torch a city and you were okay with that? You were just going to be like, "Yeah, I'm fine with Danny torching the city. I get to be king. That's why I came here." So, I mean, there's that aspect to it. Theoretically, Bran could be the greatest king that the world has ever seen, because as the Order of the Green Hand put it, he's basically a teenager with unlimited internet access, but his internet is like good internet that's factually accurate. So that's pretty cool. But I don't know. I just feel like he's going to alienate basically everybody that he's completely divorced from governing. Like, his first action was to skip his small council meeting. Like, he just left. He's like, "You guys could deal with this." And he let Bronn become head of the Reach, which is kind of a bad idea. I don't know. Chat, what are you saying? Where should I put Bran? Where should I put Bran the Broken? Once again, this is kind of a meme. Bran is a fucking doofus. Um, I think I'm gonna put Bran at. Yeah, Fernando called it. I'm gonna put him at B tier because I think his like I think he could go either way. I don't think you could really assassinate him. We also don't know how long he's gonna live because he could live like hundreds of years. I don't really know how the whole thing works. Okay, so we can just say, because for completionist's sake, what if Robert had lived? What if the board didn't do it? Ned comes to him and he's like, "Robert, it's really obvious you got cucked. You got really badly cucked. So what I need you to do is to get rid of your wife." And Robert kills Cersei and her children. And he continues on. So looking at Robert's record, now, on one hand, other than the Greyjoy Rebellion, his time in office was pretty peaceable. Not that much. There wasn't a lot of like internal warfare. There wasn't a ton of political intrigue. Well, I guess there was a lot of political intrigue, but generally speaking, the economy didn't go along too badly. Um, Things weren't like bad under his reign. The issue with Robert is the Westerosi state more or less, well, imploded's not the right way. The crown lost all of its power and legitimacy under him. Corruption became a massive issue. The realm racked up massive debts with no real obvious benefit to it. Because sometimes rulers have to take out loans. Like, if he had have taken out loans and like built like new sewer systems and like expanded the ports of King's Landing or repaired the King's Road or something like that. I think that would have worked out. That would have been fine. But he apparently just blew all the money on like random shit. He wrote up massive debts and basically mortgaged the realm. He let Littlefinger take over basically everything. I mean, let's look at who he let run the realm. He let Littlefinger, Varys, and yeah, he let Littlefinger and Varys basically run everything, which isn't really a good idea in my opinion. And he never got rid of Pycelle, and I don't know, he was just surrounded by like people, and he just didn't give a shit. I don't know. I'm torn on Robert as to where to put him. Because on one hand, he wasn't like actively evil in the way like Aegon the Unworthy was. On the other hand, his rule was oversaw like a complete erosion of the Iron Throne's power. Okay, so what do people think I should give Robert? Where should he be on this list? Okay, Fernando says C. I'm gonna go with C. I'm gonna go with C for Robert. Robert was pretty incompetent. Yeah, Robert is a massive scumbag. But just because you're a scumbag doesn't mean you're a bad administrator. Okay, so let's do, and if anybody's heard me before, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised where I put this guy. Okay, so we have Aegon the Sixth, the Young Dragon, otherwise known as Young Griff. So, Aegon the Sixth, he has a lot of things going for him. He's young, he's really, really good looking, he's bright, he's good with a sword. He has the same experience of Aegon the Fifth. He has that experience. Like, he knows what it's like to be hungry. He knows what it's like to be deprived. He knows what it's like to live as a peasant and understand the common people. He was raised with the principle that rulership is a duty, not a privilege. That being king doesn't give you the right to do it whatever you want. The job is you're a servant of the people at the end of the day. First and foremost, that. Once again, he's Faith of the Seven, so we don't have the religion issue. He's good with a sword, so he can lead from the front. And he's well educated. So, I think people are going to know what I'm going to give to Aegon the Sixth. I've stated this in the past. I think of everybody competing, he's by quite a large margin the best choice. So I'm going to give Aegon the Sixth, the Young Dragon, an S tier. I think the realm would flourish under him. So we're going to follow this up with, and this is the only picture I could find, if Aegon married Daenerys. Because that's kind of what his goal at the moment is he's going to marry Dany. He went to Westeros early because he wanted to capture a bunch of territory before Dany showed up, so he would be in a stronger position. He didn't want to beg her for the throne or like beg her to marry him. He wanted to do it from a position of strength. So the idea was he would take some territory in Westeros, set himself up as a bridgehead, and then when Dany showed up, she would marry him and they would jointly rule. Now, what makes this interesting is he would be able to blunt a lot of the problems that Dany brings to the table. Because he's very knowledgeable about the Seven Kingdoms. Once again, having a Faith of the Seven King would mean you wouldn't have the religion requirement. He has a good understanding of, like I said, history, economics, a lot of the things that Dany is sorely lacking in. But what Dany would bring to the table is dragons. And you'd have basically a good ruler who would have access to dragons. And one of the biggest issues with the Iron Throne and the way Westeros is set up is Westeros is premised on the rulers having dragons. If the ruler doesn't have dragons, the country doesn't function because the crown lands are too weak to really stand up to any of the vassals. So I really can't see any downsides. Now, Dany has her own issues. I think the biggest issue, and this is an issue that I have with Dany in general, Faith of the Seven, King, incestuous marriage, the Seven will never accept him. No, but they had accepted incest post Jaehaerys. The argument that Jaehaerys made that was accepted by the Faith was that the Targaryens are different from normal men, and so the prohibition against incest doesn't apply to them. And that was at least widely accepted. Even if they didn't like it, they at least acknowledged the marriages as being valid. So that is a fair point, though, and my issue with Dany, as we're going to find out, is while I like her more than a lot of people do, she would be bringing the Dothraki with her, who would rape and pillage the countryside and are completely uncontrollable. So I'm going to go with an A for this. Maybe people are going to get angry about me and say this is fair. I feel like Aegon would blunt the worst of Dany's excesses. He might even convince her to not bring the Dothraki. The thing with the Unsullied is the Unsullied don't loot. They just kill exactly who you tell them to kill. Okay, so let's see here. Joffrey and Cersei. Under a scenario where Joffrey rules with Cersei as regent. I think that's an interesting scenario we have here. Because I think there's a lot of advantages to this that we need to keep in mind. Because, I mean, you have two people who are total sociopaths. So I mean, that's always good. Both of them have absolutely horrible judgment. They're vain, cowardly, and Cersei is an alcoholic. I don't know. I think that this... No, I'm just joking. I don't know what would be worse, Cersei as regent or just Joffrey by himself. I guess Joffrey by himself would be worse. Because his mother can at least, like, lie decently well. Okay, so Kevin and Tommen. I couldn't get this to cut properly, but that's Kevin and Tommen. So I'm going to say you have a lot of the same benefits and a lot of the same drawbacks as Tommen and Tywin. Kevin is very similar to his brother. Now, Kevin's often insulted by people and called the B-grade version of Tywin Lannister. But given that Tywin Lannister is like the greatest politician and like ruler of his age, being the B-grade version of that isn't really like that bad. It's like, is it really that big a deal if you're the B-grade version of Deng Xiaoping or the B-grade version of Augustus Caesar, or the B-grade version of Charlemagne? That's not really an insult. That's still better than like 90% of people. So I'm going to give it a B, and it's going to be one rank lower than Tywin. Also, Kevin's a bit younger, so he'll be able to be a regent for longer. Okay. I don't know if Kevin's clever or not. Like, we don't know how smart he is. Part of it is he just wants to be a dutiful younger brother, and he doesn't have an ego, which is a good thing in general. He's happy to be in his brother's shadow. Like, I think in the books they offer him like to be a lord of some areas, but he's not really interested in it. He's fine just being a general. I think the way his son turned out isn't really his fault per se. Okay, so next we have Marcella Baratheon. Now this is another interesting one. So I'm thinking to get this to be probable, we aren't gonna assume there's a succession crisis. So we're gonna assume that Joffrey died, and then Tommen died, but Marcella didn't die in Dorne, and she inherited the throne. So how would have this worked out? Now Marcella has a lot of things going for her. Being beautiful is never a bad thing. We're told frequently that she's very intelligent. That out of the three, she's probably the most intelligent of them. That she is kind and has a pleasant personality. So, also she has been raised to be a princess. She's been raised. I assume she's had a first-rate education. Um, these are all good things. I think she definitely has the traits to be a good ruler. Presumably, either Tywin or Kevin would be alive in this scenario, and they could guide her for the first couple of years and get her kind of on bearing. Who she would marry is an interesting question. Probably one of the big questions. Marrying Tristan wouldn't be the worst one. Um, wouldn't be the worst one. They could marry her to uh, Willis Tyrell, or in the show, what's his name? Loras Tyrell. That would work out good. They could marry her to Sweet Robin, who turned out to be a Chad. There's a lot of eligible males that they could marry her off to that would make a very good prince consort. I don't know. I'm going to say she's the wild card in this one. I'm actually going to give her an A. Because I think she could potentially turn out really well. I think she has a lot more potential than her younger brother. And I think you could teach her. And if she married someone who was also competent, you could have like another Jaehaerys era. I don't know. Maybe people are going to disagree with me on that one. Okay, so Cersei ruling alone in the show. Now, the first biggest issue with this is Cersei has absolutely no valid claim to the throne. She has no claim to the throne. She doesn't even keep the last name Baratheon and try to rule using the title of her husband to try to say I was the queen. I'm ruling through that. She doesn't have any children anymore, so she can't rule as regent and kind of do a dowager thing. So the question is, what legitimacy does she have? And frankly, she has none. By the point we get to her in the show, she has legitimacy by virtue of not being Dany, and people find it preferable to have an ultra corrupt, hated, incompetent queen who they can control / overthrow than a zealot who has dragons. Because, I mean, the one thing to be said about Cersei, as far as kind of the nobility goes, is they can overthrow her whenever she wants, whenever they want. She's entirely dependent upon the goodwill of her vassals, specifically Euron and Randall Tarley and the Freys. I think she could have maybe kind of been set up almost as a puppet of the various great houses. The Lannister armies by this point in the war are completely decimated. Casterly Rock is out of money. The Crownlands are also decimated. Especially with the loss of the Tyrell alliance, the Lannisters really don't have much left. That being said, I think realistically she would have won the war with Dany. She had a bigger army. She had the Scorpions set up. She had a better fleet. The issue with what wound up happening is Dany somehow didn't lose any soldiers from any of her battles, and she still had 100,000 Dothraki, even though we saw them all die. Even though we saw most of the Unsullied die, she still had all of them. The Golden Company died in one shot, and all the guys with the no Littlefinger. Okay, maybe I'll put Littlefinger on. Okay, if people want a LARP where Littlefinger makes himself king, then who am I to argue? I'll add him to the list because why not? Let's see here. Let me just edit him in. You know what? I'm gonna actually lower Brand to C tier. He would probably be a disaster. He's too autistic to like even interact with people. He would just be in the middle of negotiations and go, "I have to go now," and then go into an autistic coma. So yeah. So Cersei, well, she actually did a much better job in the show than she did in the books. I think it would have been a disaster. She would have been overthrown as soon as Dany was dead, so she gets a D tier. Okay. Let's see. We don't have a ton of people left, unless I... Oh, let me just refresh this for Littlefinger. So Littlefinger, he's a literal Bond villain, which is an interesting choice for the king of your realm. Like, he has a Bond villain name. He dresses like a Bond villain. And he has like a 4D chess, like 30-year long plan to cure the common cold. So my belief, and kind of the thing I like as a meme kind of, is the idea that he's a puppet of the Iron Bank. That the Iron Bank has sent him to like wheedle himself in and take over Westeros. So once he takes it over, he can loot the state and send the money back to Bravos. That he's like a puppet of international finance. So I kind of like that idea. It's probably not the case. I think Littlefinger would be a disaster, partially just because he doesn't really have any legitimacy. He has absolutely no legitimacy to the throne. He's a complete sociopath. Absolutely no one likes him. I think book Littlefinger would be a lot better than show Littlefinger, because book Littlefinger was a lot more charming and was a lot better at kind of playing below the radar, that kind of thing. He was a lot more competent. So Littlefinger gets an D tier. It would be... He might do the worst job of everybody on this list. Okay, let's talk about the Dragon Queen next. And I've been putting this one off. Actually, you know what? We'll do her last. Okay, so Cersei and Tommen. I think it would have all the same issues as Cersei ruling by herself. So we're just going to put it there. Okay, Tommen and Marjorie. This is a scenario where Kevin dies, but Marjorie stays around and guides Tommen. I don't know. I don't have a ton of stuff to put there. I'm just not going to have Joffrey Marjorie because I don't feel like doing this. Let's see here. I'm going to go with, I guess, C for this one. I think it would work out okay in terms of, like, public opinion. But, no, you know what? I'll give it a B. Olenna would be the true power, plus they'd have the funding of the Tyrells and the Lannister support. If this was in the books, then they could make like Willis Tyrell the Hand of the King and let him rule the Seven Kingdoms, and that would probably work out pretty well. Okay, so we're down to probably two of the more controversial ones. Dany and Jon. This is what people really wanted to have happen in this show. Even the characters in the show were like, Dany and Jon can get married. They can jointly rule the Seven Kingdoms. They could revive the Targaryen dynasty. It's an interesting idea. Would it have worked? I don't really think so. I don't really know if I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think they're both too idealistic. They're both very bad at diplomacy and compromise. Uh yes, Fritz, we will stream again soon. I'm sorry, it's just been busy with work and that kind of thing. Let's see here. Cyber Ninja Zero says the Citadel would have probably poisoned them. Yes, that's extremely likely. That probably would have happened. I don't know. I just don't really know how to really put this. If this would be, I think I'm gonna go with a C on this one, because I don't really know if it would be better to have Jon there than just having Dany rule by herself. Jon is somewhat more personable, but I don't know if he necessarily really brings anything, because Dany's not going to listen to him and she'll wear the pants in the relationship. Still, though, I don't think it's as bad as some of the other people, so I'm going to give this a C. Nixon says C+. Yeah, it's not the worst. I don't think it would be like a total disaster, but it definitely wouldn't be very good. And that brings us to the Dragon Queen. Daenerys, Stormborn, Khaleesi of the Great Grass, that kind of thing. I am probably more sympathetic to her than most people are, at least in these circles. Because my only real complaint against her is bringing a horde of Dothraki with her, who are like, she can't control them. The Dothraki are going to rape and pillage the countryside. They're going to devastate large portions of Westeros. How is she going to feed them during the winter without raiding and pillaging? Dothraki are savages. If she wasn't bringing them, I'd give her probably a higher rating. Just for that. That's my single biggest issue with her. My other issue with her is she doesn't know how to do diplomacy. She can't really negotiate. She can't really make deals with people. Any of that kind of thing. She does have the advantage, though, of being completely uncorruptible, of legitimately caring about people. I'm ignoring the whole King's Landing massacre thing because that was bullshit and that's not going to happen in the books. She does have genuine compassion. She is, at least in her mind, she at least tries to be a force for good in the world, which often kind of backfires on her. Dany is a hard person to put down because there are some good things about her, but there's also a lot of bad things about her. I don't know. I ignore what happened at the end of season 8 because it was just character assassination to shock people. With her, I'd probably put her as a B. But I'm not going to put her higher than that because there's just too many problems. Even if I don't hate her as much as a lot of people do. Probably post Battle for the Dawn, I might put her higher because the Dothraki are gone. I don't know. It's an interesting question. So that's how I would rank everybody. Now, someone was saying you gave everybody a C, and that's just because I try to be like fair with these. I'm just trying to be reasonable here. So like, I don't know. The issue is most of the people who are vying for the throne are completely unsuited for holding power and for ruling. A lot of them are just kind of completely incompetent. So, yeah, that's my opinions on the matter. I hope even if you disagree with me that you found the list to be interesting and maybe you kind of learned some lore or something. So that is the Canada Day stream. As always, God bless everyone. This is Argent. We must dissent.